Okay, everyone, so I'm going to kick off today's webinar. So thank you so much for attending this session. I'm going to be running through some fundamental leadership skills training today. For those of you that don't know me, I am Gemma Davidson. I'm the HR Manager for Vincents, and I have worked in HR for over 10 years, for the most part in professional services firms. So when we talk about fundamental leadership training, I'm sure you would all know that leadership is full of grey areas. Nothing is usually black and white in terms of approach to take with staff. Okay, so in terms of the agenda today, everyone, first and foremost, I'm going to talk to you about managing people and how that begins with managing yourself. Secondly, managing upwards. This can be one of the trickiest things to do, especially with individuals who might be early in their career or new to a business. And it can be especially prevalent when you have hierarchies within the structure of your business. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about managing people and performance every day, and this will be a big part of the focus of the webinar today. So I'm going to explore some day-to-day techniques and tips for managers to engage employees, achieve high levels of morale and productivity in terms of formal performance management. I'll then go through formal performance management, including talking about undertaking reviews in a formal way, managing underperforming employees informally and formally, and lastly, talk to you about adapting your management style to different types of employees that might work within your business. Okay, so managing self. So before anyone can effectively manage or inspire others within their workplace or within their business, they need to be exceptional at managing themselves. So I'm going to run through about 7 key steps and simple tips for individuals to manage themselves day to day within their role and longer term in terms of their own personal and professional development. So the first one, pretty simple. You should approach the way that you work by being action orientated and fostering good organizational habits. So we know that bad habits can suck the energy out of you, and your productivity will usually be low if you have very bad habits. Good habits also quickly become part of your working life and part of your everyday rhythm, which will put you in good stead to achieve successful outcomes. It also puts you in good stead with actually managing other individuals if you yourself are firing on all cylinders. Now, secondly, when managing yourself, always be a problem solver, not a complainer. So you should be exploring ways that you can contribute to solving problems in your business or with employees in a positive way rather than negative. We talk about vampires in workplaces and businesses. These are individuals who usually point out problems really quickly. They're complainers and not solvers. A workplace full of people who fall into that category of being a vampire can have some pretty devastating effects on morale, productivity, client experience, and ultimately it all comes down to your bottom line. They can suck the life out of any workplace. And what happens when one vampire bites another person? Well, they become a vampire. So a quirky thing as it sounds, don't you as an individual in your business or in any organization become a vampire yourself. Now, another tip for managing yourself effectively is to embrace change for the need of the business, not just for change's sake. You should question and try to understand the need for a change, seek understanding before passing any judgment. But after understanding a need for a change, be a champion for that change. And if you are very senior in your business and you're trying to bring in a change, make sure that you positively do that and you explain it from the outset as to what is actually the need for the change. When an employee says to me, morale is low or staff are very unhappy, I always try and turn that around on the person and say to them, you are part of the morale, you are part of the unhappiness in the workplace. And so what are you going to do to increase morale or happiness amongst employees? Now, 4, don't be afraid to make mistakes and own up to them. The best leaders build credibility by doing this. Credibility is absolutely vital in any business, especially for a leader, and it can be lost very quickly if you are dishonest or you try to cover up a mistake. You will increase trust in your colleagues and your employees if you own up, and you will be perceived as having pretty strong integrity. This can work with pretty small mistakes right up to pretty big ones. Now, the 5th tip is to ask for extra responsibility. So for those who might be in lower level roles are looking to progress quite quickly in an organization or have really strong career goals, then you need to be taking on responsibility and more responsibility and seeking full ownership for the task or opportunity. Expect and be prepared to be held accountable for the outcome. So if you are asking for more responsibility and you're taking things on, expect to be held accountable, especially if something doesn't go right. And then the last thing that I say to people where it all starts in terms of managing yourself is seeking out a mentor, especially those early in their career or even having a very significant change in their career or the way their business is working. Taking advantage of the expertise and knowledge of a mentor cannot be underestimated. That could be someone that you work with, but likewise, it could be someone completely separate to your business. You can talk with them, obviously, about any workplace problems that might be happening to seek a different perspective, new ideas, and also to plan your own personal and professional development. Someone who might have significantly more experience than you, it can be seen as highly beneficial. Most leaders in businesses and strong business owners that I see have had a mentor along the way, and to reach the next level, they continue to seek out mentors. Okay, so the second part of the presentation is to talk about managing upwards. So this is geared towards people in a business who might be at a lower level in terms of the hierarchy. It can be very hard to have to manage upwards and give some direction, I suppose, to people that work above you as to what you need to move forward. So I'm just going to give you some tips around how to effectively manage upwards. So first and foremost, very simple one, get to know your manager and the way they work. And what I mean by that is their preferred method of working. So actually sit down with the individual and talk with them about how they would prefer, what would be their preference of the way that they work with you. So it might be if you have a manager that's very detail orientated, then you're not going to walk in to their office unannounced to pitch an idea. You might need to put together a report. So play to that individual's comfort level and really get to know how they work so that you can be successful. Secondly, you should all respect your manager's time. So arrange frequent meetings with your manager, be well prepared for the meeting, prepare an agenda to ensure that you're both getting the most out of it. Use that time pretty wisely because most people in businesses, business owners or leaders in a business are pretty short of time. Thirdly, you should request frequent feedback. Don't wait till formal review time. So I have a lot of people say, I don't really know what my manager thinks of me, or I'm not getting enough feedback. Well, the onus is actually on you as an individual to seek out feedback and to really drive your own career. So I always say to employees that they should ensure that they are seeking feedback along the way, and it might be quite specific, but that leaders are very open to providing feedback on the spot. Feedback should become part of every business's culture and not just done at a routine time as part of in different parts of the year where things are kind of held back until that formal process. Now, fourthly, I would really encourage you to approach your quarterly, 6-monthly, or yearly performance review, whatever it is within the business, to be a two-way conversation. So what I say to employees and what I say to leaders that they should say to employees and be clear on is that they shouldn't rely upon the manager or the leader to run that conversation. We should really empower employees to be driving their own conversation around their career, their performance, and be clear about what their intentions are in terms of their own development. So it's important, I think, for leaders to be very upfront about that when setting up a structure of review. Okay, so managing people and performance every day. So the words performance appraisal, development reviews, self-evaluation, goal setting, benchmarks, KPIs, performance management, and scorecards can often strike the fear into some of the best leaders in businesses. I've met some pretty excellent technical leaders in my time, but they dread that 1 hour sit down a year where they have to sit someone down and talk about that individual's performance. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the do's and don'ts of formal performance appraisals. However, if you take anything away from the webinar today, I hope it will be that managing people involves managing every day and not just on a formal basis once or twice a year. So I went to a HR seminar a couple of years ago, and something stuck with me, and I've spoke to a lot of leaders about this over the time that I have worked in different businesses, and I think it resonates no matter where I've gone. And that is that every leader, in every business should know three things. Should know that employees want to know three things. So every employee wants to know, what do I need to do? So what is required of me? What is the job that I need to undertake? 2, how am I going? So how am I performing day to day and more formally on a monthly, quarterly, 6-monthly basis? And lastly, what is my future? So really employees are looking for that what, how, and then future focus. So communicating openly and honestly with your staff will ensure that your expectations of them are clear. Then they will know they've done a good job or need to improve, and they can act on it right away. And they will also understand where they fit in the organization. It's really important to talk to employees about their role in the organization, where the organization's going, and what your expectations are of them very early on. Also, the yearly performance appraisal stops being feared or seen as a chore by leaders if there is constant conversations throughout the year. I'm sure many of you have heard that there should never be a surprise for an employee in their performance appraisal. Everything that you should say should be a summary of what has been said throughout the year or 6 months, and a focus heavily on the future and your expectations of the future. So some other simple tips for successful leaders, and successful leaders that I've seen within organizations include the number that I'm going to talk about here. I want to be clear with you that these are pretty simple, and good leadership day to day is pretty simple if you know how to do it. So some of them are, firstly, always acknowledge your staff when you arrive at work. Saying good morning to every single member of staff within your immediate area goes a long way. Secondly, listen first and be approachable. So allow an employee to talk first, especially if they're coming to talk to you about an issue that they're experiencing within work, with a client, or even at home. And just focus on your intention on the employee. Don't talk over them. So this is a common mistake a lot of leaders make in relation to problem solving. So a lot of leaders in businesses or even business owners are time poor. You're trying to push forward and have a pretty good idea of where you want to go, and you're very focused. Now, you might find that you have a tendency to jump in and try and solve a problem for an employee because you might find it's a small problem or it's easily solved. It's important to at least allow them an opportunity to speak freely and for you to listen and just take the time to do that. That can be quite frustrating for some, but it's very important to build morale and build rapport with that individual. Now, thirdly, have an open door policy. So we talk about that a lot. Now, that doesn't mean your door is always open, but it's about being clear about your employees, about your expectations. So if you have to have your door closed, you have to have a meeting, you have to meet a client, whatever it might be, it's about communicating that to everyone, and generally talking about having time for individuals and being approachable if they have any challenges. Now, fourthly, you should model appropriate behavior. So if you say, as an example, that you're too busy to meet an employee, and then you have a 2-hour lunch and a 30-minute conversation and earshot of that employee about your weekend, then you have a conversation about the employee about their lateness or they're never on time to a meeting, usually you're going to lose credibility pretty fast. So really think about modeling that appropriate behavior in all that you do within your workplace. Now, fifthly, you should encourage continuously and acknowledge immediately effort and results. So this goes 2 ways in terms of feedback. You should always give constructive feedback very quickly, but likewise, you should also give positive feedback very quickly. Don't sit on something and wait till Christmas or end of financial year to give someone some recognition for something they've done. Recognize them right away and even think about just-in-time rewarding as well. Invest in your employees, get to know them on a personal level. So actually spend some time understanding what's going on in their world outside of work. Follow through, don't overpromise and underdeliver. So again, that's what we hear a lot about poor leaders, poor managers. They overpromise the world and then underdeliver, don't turn up to meetings, or don't hand in that report when they said they would, or don't organize a training session for an employee when they committed to it. So ensure that you're not overpromising, under-delivering. Now, a big one, I talked a little bit about it earlier, share in the vision with your staff. So employees really want to know where they sit in an organization, what impact they're having, and where the organization is going and where they fit. So ensure that you are talking to them about your goals. Obviously, there will be some areas that might be confidential, but talk even generally with them about where the business is heading and their role within that. And lastly, always be clear about your expectations. Now, one of my personal tips that I talk to all leaders about is not underestimating, just asking an employee, are you okay? In particular, if you see a difference in behavior with an employee, perhaps they're high performing and then all of a sudden they become low performing, or they start turning up late to work. It can be quite easy to jump in and challenge that behavior, or go into a mode of telling them off or being very direct about what they shouldn't be doing. But in fact, the important thing is to actually explore what is happening, what has made it occur. And that might be a number of things. It could be something going on outside work. It could be dissatisfaction with the work that they're doing, dissatisfaction with their manager, an interpersonal issue within the workplace or outside. So just be prepared to ask that question and ask it openly, and be prepared also to listen. Okay, so the next part of the session is to talk about formal performance appraisals, the do's and the don'ts. So I'm going to talk through those do's and don'ts in relation to formal performance appraisals. And in particular, I'm going to cover off some of the things you need to think about prior to having a performance appraisal meeting, during the actual performance appraisal itself, how that structure should run and the focus, and then lastly, the follow-up after the performance appraisal has occurred. So first and foremost, prior to organizing your sit down with your employee to go through their performance, firstly, be clear and transparent and allow them time to prepare. So actually say to them, give them some notice, give them a couple of days notice at least, usually a week would be good, to actually go get their thoughts together for this structured meeting that's upcoming. So be clear about how that meeting is going to go, how long it's going to go for, and your expectations of them when they come to the meeting. That might include having a form completed by you, by them, and ensure that if that is the case, that you at least have a couple of days to review that form before sitting down face to face. Now, you should set the tone prior to even organizing the discussion that you expect it to be a two-way conversation. So ask that employee to provide their written self-evaluation before, and be clear that you expect it to be about 60% them talking and 40% you. There's a lot of employees that turn up to these meetings and just expect you as a leader or a manager or owner to talk to them about their performance, when in fact it needs to be driven by the individual. Now lastly, plan. So take 30 minutes a few days before the performance appraisal to be clear and plan out some of the key points that you want to cover and make, and write those down so you've got a bit of a structure in your mind and you're not turning up not having a clue what you're going to talk about. Some other tips include asking their peers or other managers about their performance. So don't just rely upon what you've seen. So it might be that you ask other peers around them within the workplace. It might be that you ask clients to give you some feedback on their performance. So when you sit down with them, you're giving them a number of different views, a number of a number of areas of performance feedback, and not just from you and what you've observed. Now, ensure that you give them your full attention. So a lot of leaders have performance appraisal meetings in their office. Now, I'm a big believer in getting out of the office. So either get away into a different place outside completely, or get into a meeting room. Get away from distractions, get away from the phone, from people actually interrupting you, and your computer. It can be very easily to get distracted, and it can have a massive impact on employees who feel that you don't think they're important. So plan out some time, get a space where you're not going to be interrupted, and focus completely on them. You should also, with that, let your team know that you're having a review meeting. So share with your team when you're doing reviews so that they know where you might be and who you might be with, and that it's important. And lastly, as I've said before, don't underestimate asking that "are you okay" question. So lead your performance appraisal with that if you feel there have been significant issues coming up, say in the last 6-8 weeks. Okay, so the review itself, the performance appraisal meeting itself, this is a pretty pivotal meeting in any employee's employment with a business. Even though it may only happen once a year, and even some employees dread it, it is an important time to sit down, evaluate performance, talk about how things are going, and really talk about the future and where you see the individual and what your expectations are of them. So some of the do's in terms of your actual review meeting or your check-in are to firstly allow employees to evaluate their own performance, to get them to reflect on their key measurables that you've set, their KPIs, their budget, their performance more generally, and ask them their views. Always get them to lead the conversation first. Even if there's disagreement, that's okay, but they cannot say that they haven't been given a chance to be heard. Now, secondly, actively listen. So don't just wait for your turn to speak. Actively tune in and listen to the individual. And that helps, as I said, if you're completely away. Don't just focus on the numbers. So again, that's something that happens in particular in professional services quite a lot, especially with businesses where there are set budgets for individuals. You see this in law, obviously you see this in accounting, in the two areas that I've worked heavily in. So you need to be evaluating an individual's performance all round, not just focusing on those budgets and those numbers. And what I mean is you need to be looking at business development, client experience and service. You need to be looking at their impact in the office, the morale that they bring to others that they work with. Those are all important expectations that you should have of any good performer, not just bringing in the dollars. Okay, if you have raised a performance concern previously and there has been improvement prior to the performance meeting, then make sure that you talk about that. Don't just ignore it. So again, a lot of leaders sometimes deal with a performance issue, it improves, and then they don't have a follow-up or don't talk about it in the performance appraisal. Make sure that you do. Summarize it about what you had spoken to them about, when you spoke to them, what improvement you've seen, and congratulate them on that turnaround. Now, keep the meeting professional. So in particular, if you are discussing performance concerns, or you need to have further performance conversations around underperformance, it's okay to break the ice at the meeting and talk, about your weekend or anything, but generally speaking, try and keep it pretty professional. Now, provide constructive feedback. It's an easy thing to say, but it's important to be balanced in the way that you provide feedback to an individual and be clear and specific. So if I can give you an example, it's not good enough to say to someone, you have terrible time management. In that example, I'd probably be saying to you, well, you need to be specific. So actually say to them, I asked you to prepare some reports by this deadline. The deadline wasn't achieved. And so I have concerns about your time management. Actually be specific about what you see and not general. Provide equal time throughout the meeting to talk about past, present, and future. So ensure that there is equal time for each of those areas. They're all very important. And when you are discussing an employee's future, focus on agreeing on 4 or 5 SMART goals. I'm sure many of you would have heard what a SMART goal is, but to be clear, they are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. So an example, if we think about a financial SMART goal, say for an accountant, then it might be achieve a budget of 300 grand for the financial year. This can be measured via our finance system. It is achievable based on the expected workload file mix, previous year's results, etc. It is relevant to their role as an accountant, and a yearly goal is appropriate with a follow-up informal review every 3 months to keep track on progress. So actually break down your goals. Try and be specific and not general. Okay, so now on to the big don'ts when we get to performance appraisal meetings and reviews. So number 1, what a lot of leaders do sometimes is Postpone meetings over and over again. So do not postpone a performance appraisal meeting at the last minute unless it is absolutely unavoidable. And as a rule, you should never reschedule a performance appraisal meeting more than twice. If it occurs with very little explanation other than I was busy, something urgent came up, there is no doubt that that employee will feel disempowered, and probably their productivity is going to go down. They're going to think I'm not important, I don't know where I fit, and you likely will end up with a resignation. So it's that important to ensure that you lock in those times and you stick to them. And if you can't, that you are clear as to the reasons why, and they have to be significant reasons. Now, you should also avoid surprises. I've said that before. So if there's a performance concern, do not talk about it in the meeting for the first time. You should have spoken about it pre the meeting, as and when it occurred. And then lastly, don't underestimate what feedback means to employees. In particular, Gen Y, Gen Z coming through, they are absolutely seeking feedback constantly. And even though other generations might not have grown up within that type of workplace, that absolutely is required now for younger generations coming through. So you've got to be prepared to give lots of feedback, constructive and positive. And then a big one, don't bring your mobile phone into the meeting. That's hard a lot of the time for a lot of leaders. But if there is an emergency, an employee will come and get you. Someone will come and find you. So try and remove that final distraction from that performance appraisal meeting and show how much that conversation means to you as it does to the employee. Okay, so managing underperforming employees informally and formally. So the next part of the session is to go through and talk about formal performance management, but also some informal performance management techniques. It's a pretty tricky area, and many employment and industrial lawyers will attest to the fact that many business owners and leaders make fundamental major mistakes when dealing with underperformance. Things that could absolutely be avoided and would see you not caught up with fair work on a procedural point, which seems to happen a lot of the time, especially with small businesses. So some tips for you as leaders in terms of managing underperformance is first and foremost looking at common mistakes when taking a hard approach. So a common mistake that often businesses make is that you will move to formal performance management too quickly. So there's been no, excuse me, there's been no informal process that's occurred. There's been no check-in. There's been no "are you okay" questioning of an employee when there is a behavioral change. So you need to have gone through that process, and you need to have been clear with an employee that you are leading down the path of formally managing their performance and not just spring it on them. Another big one, common mistake that businesses and leaders make is failing to follow due process and best practice. Now that can be things like failing to offer a support person to an employee, failing to give them 24 hours notice for a performance appraisal meeting, a performance meeting of any kind. Lastly, we also have a hard approach of not seeking a response from an employee. So not providing that opportunity to have their say, especially if you're bringing up an issue with them and you want a response. So often you'll see that in Fair Work a lot, where individuals have not been given that chance to respond. Not giving the employee an opportunity to improve, so or making it unrealistic and unreasonable in terms of the time frame for them to improve. So for example, if they are 30 grand behind budget and you say, right, I want that up to date within 2 weeks, that's going to be seen as pretty unreasonable by Fair Work, and you're probably going to come into some trouble in terms of that approach. So we also see common mistakes, though, on the other side when you take a very soft approach. So there needs to be a balance in the way that you're approaching managing underperformance. The soft approach includes not taking any action at all, letting an employee underperform and not dealing with it. And the types of effects that that can have is massively, you will see an impact upon morale in the team, and an impact in particular on high achievers. So high achievers will look at low achievers and see you not dealing with them and find themselves despondent, find themselves not wanting to put in the extra mile, not wanting to raise their productivity. And generally speaking, you'll find that whole morale will drop. So it's really important to, when you're dealing with performance management, to try and actually deal with it. If you avoid or you turn a blind eye, what will happen is you will lose your high performers. The other thing that we also talk about when taking a very soft approach with underperformers is you will find that you will have presenteeism within your team. So sometimes we see absenteeism go up because there's a performance issue in the team not being dealt with. Sometimes we see presenteeism go up. And I've talked about it on here as the silent killer. So presenteeism, what does that mean? Well, individuals are turning up to work, they're here, but they're not really being that productive. And in a lot of cases, they're distracting others. And often that's a lot tougher to deal with than actually someone who is off on sick leave or coming in late frequently. Okay, so managing underperformance tips. So first and foremost, when you observe underperformance, either competency-based or behavioral-based, quickly have a conversation with the employee and pinpoint the behavior or the skill that they're lacking and be clear about what your expectations are going forward. Again, it might well be if it's a change in behavior or a change in performance that you ask, are you okay? And understand if there is something outside influencing the change. So 2, be specific about your observations. So be specific about the underperformance that you've observed. Use figures, use facts, use your own observations. So you might say, on 2 occasions, you have missed deadlines, and I want to understand, is everything okay? Why that has occurred and how we can stop it happening in the future. And be prepared again to actively listen to what is going on. Within an informal discussion, don't be afraid to be clear about your expectations going forward. Even if there are mitigating circumstances for an employee as to why they're underperforming. So sometimes I have leaders go, oh, they told me that they had this issue at home, so I didn't want to push it. It's not about pushing it, but you can be clear about your expectations. You might reduce your expectations because you're aware of something happening, but don't let them off the hook, as some might say. You might have a number of informal meetings with an employee before you end up in formal performance management. And take that time to have a check-in with them. Take them out of the office. Go for what I call a walk and talk. Actually get them into a different setting, get them comfortable, and hopefully they'll open up a bit more. In cases where you're having informal meetings and you're finding that it leads to no improvement, not sufficient enough improvement, or serious underperformance, then start planning out a formal performance management process. And like I said earlier, be clear with the employee that you're heading down that line. Don't spring it on them. Just be very clear that it actually is going to be coming. Okay, so formal performance management process. As a first step, when you're formally dealing with an employee who is underperforming, you should advise them that they need to attend a formal meeting to discuss their performance concerns. You need to be providing a 24-hour notice period that that meeting is going to occur, and you need to offer them a support person to have at the meeting. If you have HR within your business, then obviously they should be there guiding you or providing you some support. Excuse me. Now, when we talk about a support person, support people can be a range of different individuals, but the key is in their title. They are there to support and support the individual alone. They are not there to advocate. They should not talk on behalf of the individual. And if they do, you can actually stop the meeting. So if they want to take a break and talk to the individual employee, that's fine. You are allowing them to be there to support, but not to advocate. I've had many different people be support people, including husbands, wives, children, brothers, and even one time I had a barrister. And each and every one of them were told very clearly at the start of the meeting, they're not there to advocate, talk on behalf of the individual, but effectively just to support. Again, prior to conducting an underperformance meeting with an employee, the manager and HR, if you have them, should be clear about what issues are going on and what has been done informally to try and improve things. Informally, it might be going on for 4 to 6 weeks, and then you've led to this point. So summarize that at the start of the conversation with the employee and then be clear about the issues that you're seeing ongoing. Allow the employee the opportunity to respond. So you go first, talk about what's been occurring, talk about why you feel you now need to lead down a path of formally managing their performance and what your expectations are, and then allow them an opportunity to respond. Don't get into a back and forth with the employee when they respond. Remember, this is their perspective. It may well be wrong in your eyes, but they need to be given a chance to say how they feel and their view on things. You may not take that on at all, but they can say hand on heart that they were given a chance to respond. Fair Work will look very favorably at that. Now, you should consider their responses and your expectations. So if there is something that comes up in that meeting where you think, okay, maybe I should adjust my expectations, understanding some of the things they've said in response, take some time out. If you need to have another meeting in a couple of days, do that. Don't feel it all has to be wrapped up on the spot and you have a clear plan at that point. And lastly, you should determine a course of action following the meeting, or even within the meeting if we're talking about something quite minor in terms of behavioral changes that need to occur. And then lastly, you need to be having a second meeting, like I said, with the employee to advise them the outcome. So the same rule applies for that meeting. If you're continuing to talk about underperformance, you need to give them notice of the meeting, usually 24 hours, longer if you can, and provide a support person. Provide them the opportunity to bring a support person of their choice. Okay, so the last session that I'm going to talk about today is different employees that you find within workplaces. So I came across this again about 5 years ago in HR, and I think it really resonates in any business that I've worked within or any business owner I've spoke to, that you will find in any workplace that you usually have 3 different buckets of individuals that work for you. You will have the cheerleaders in the organization, you'll have vampires, I've spoke about them already, and then usually you've got the other 40%. So those are the individuals that are kind of in the middle. They can be swayed either way, they're easily kind of influenced, but they actually are quite a large part of your business. So to summarize, cheerleaders are those employees who are fully engaged in their role and the firm in which they work. They go above and beyond, they're not afraid of change. They promote the firm they work for. They're positive within the workplace and outside. They live and breathe the values of the firm and are passionate about their role. They also have the capability of positively influencing a lot of other people. On the other hand, many vampires live in different organizations and they are actively disengaged employees. They have a negative attitude towards their duties and usually the place that they work. And inside and outside, they resist change. They actively white ant innovation. They focus on problems and not solutions. And sometimes, even more possibly than the cheerleaders, they have a greater ability to influence others. Then, as I said, you have the other 40%. These are those individuals that sit in the middle. They are usually ambivalent employees, so they might not be swayed either way. But they also can be positively seen as reliable, hardworking, usually knowledgeable, and they stick around for often quite a long time. They're usually not leaders or constant innovators, but they are highly susceptible to influence on the positive side and the negative side. So within daily life, we often say, sometimes unconsciously, that we can be influenced by those around us. Most of us are spending more and more time at work than ever. So if one person in 20 is negative, it's not going to have a lot of effect. But when you have, say, 12 people in a team of 20 who are within that vampire bucket and bringing a negative mood to your organization, it's going to have a pretty massive effect on your morale. And likewise, it's going to have a pretty massive effect on the financial outcomes of your business. So it's very important to manage your cheerleaders, your high performers, keep them going, keep them focused, keep them retained. Likewise, it's very important to deal with your vampires and deal with them quickly, either convert them or actually look at performance managing them out of your business. Don't linger too long. You will lose your high performers if you do. So firstly, 4 simple steps to help you deal with high performers and what they might well be looking for. So managing cheerleaders. Most important is acknowledge, acknowledge, acknowledge. Never take for granted a cheerleader's enthusiasm, drive, commitment to their role or the firm they work within. Praise them, thank them individually, and publicly is also very important. So take the time in team meetings, one-on-one, via an email, to say thank you for someone's work and to praise specifically what they've done in a positive way. Involve them early in innovative projects. They will thrive on that involvement, and they'll often be change champions if you get them early. Get them on board early and get them committed to a project to roll out. Don't overlook them for advancement. This happens a lot in organizations. Those individuals who are kind of priceless, you need them so bad, they're so critical to an organization, sometimes they'll be held back in terms of advancement. Do not hold these individuals back. Make sure that they continue to develop, continue to meet their needs in their career development. And lastly, when a cheerleader tells you something is not working in your business or in your team, in your workplace, listen to them and take notice. You can be assured it's pretty serious and you should take some action. Okay, so secondly, 5 tips for you to manage vampires in your business. When I talk about this analogy, everyone sort of realizes very quickly who their vampires are. So when you can identify those vampires in your business, firstly, talk to them about their negatively quickly. Don't let it fester. Don't let it escalate. Be clear about the behavior you've seen and you won't tolerate it, and ask for an immediate change. Be clear about those behavioral expectations. Explore those potential outside influences if the change has happened at a particular time and they were a high performer before. Ask them for solutions, not problems. So a lot of the time this group will say, vent, be negative, moan about their environment. So ask them, what would you do to change it? How are you going to improve morale? Turn it back on them and ask for their solution. And then this might be a hard one to say, but you shouldn't waste a lot of energy or time also on this group of individuals. Deal with them pretty quickly from a performance perspective, and it might be that they need to be terminated within any business. A lot of people spend 90% of the time dealing with 10 to 20% of their workplace, and these are the vampires of the workplace. When actually 90% of your time should be dealt with the high performers and the cheerleaders that are going to excel within your business. So then lastly, managing the other 40%. So those who don't sit in the cheerleader or the vampire camps, as I said, are those 40% of individuals who are susceptible to both. So what's important with these guys? Well, you should provide them a cheerleader buddy from day one. So if they come into your business, they're always going to be in this 40%. They're not going to fit into either category. So team them up with someone who you know is going to have a positive influence on them. Introduce them to internal committees or projects that you might have going on. So again, you get them early and you get them invigorated from early on with any project or a committee. Ask their opinion frequently. They might be quite quiet in meetings, so actually single them out and say, look, I'd like to know what you think. If you're not sure now, tell us later. Come and see me one-on-one. But actually make it very clear that you want to hear what they have to say so that they feel important. Don't underestimate fresh eyes. When you have new people come into your business and they're in that 40% bucket and you have others that have been there a long time, don't underestimate if they come to you with an innovative idea. Even if it doesn't work now, make them feel good about actually having some energy in the business and bringing that in as an idea. Again, explore potential outside influences. If you're finding someone's quite flat or has a change of behavior in this group, talk to them and get them to open up. And lastly, take a really personal interest in them. Get to know them, get to know what makes them tick. And remember, that group are a group of individuals that you should approach as cheerleaders in training and not vampires. Okay, so that's everything, guys. Thank you so much. I know it was a little bit longer than it was meant to be, but I certainly hope that you found it useful. And I'm happy to open it up on questions on here via the chat function. Otherwise, my contact details are in the presentation, and happy for you to email me following the presentation today.